Ever heard of a car so powerful, so terrifying, that racing regulators had to change the rules just to get rid of it? Meet the Porsche 917 and its monstrous flat 12 engine. This isn't just the story of an iconic race car. It's the story of something so extreme that it shook the foundations of motorsport. It's a tale of engineering brilliance, raw danger, and how absolute dominance led to its quiet rulebook-driven demise. If there ever was a car that screamed too fast, too furious in real life, it was the Porsche 917. Unleashed in 1969, this beast looked like it had rolled straight out of a fever dream and onto the racetrack. At its core, a wild 4.5-liter air-cooled flat 12 engine. 12 cylinders growling behind the driver like a pack of wolves. Early versions cranked out a brutal 520 horsepower. But in its insane Can-Am turbocharged form, it pushed a jaw-dropping 1,100 horsepower. This wasn't just a race car, it was a rocket with wheels. But this wasn't just about numbers. The 917 had a presence. It had menace. Drivers respected it, some feared it. In fact, when it first hit the track, many flat out refused to drive it. It had a reputation not just for speed, but for being a beast to handle. A car that could kill you if you dare underestimate it. So what made the 917 so terrifyingly fast? Let's talk about that engine. Porsche didn't just want to compete in endurance racing, they wanted to obliterate it. The flat 12 was designed with that very intention. It was essentially two flat 6 engines joined at the crankcase, creating a wide, low profile that improved aerodynamics and lowered the center of gravity. Air-cooled and naturally aspirated in its original form, the engine packed 4 valves per cylinder, dual overhead cams, and an intricate mechanical fuel injection system that was incredibly advanced for the time. But here's the kicker. The early versions were so violently powerful and unpredictable that drivers described it as a missile with no guidance system. But Porsche wasn't done. In the early 1970s, they turbocharged the 917 for the North American Can-Am series, pushing the flat 12 past 1,000 horsepower. These engines were so overbuilt that they could shred tires, melt gearboxes, and warp chassis. It was like trying to leash a rocket. But more than just a car, the 917 was a message from Porsche to the racing world. Limits are meant to be tested, and sometimes they're meant to be broken. It showed what happens when innovation goes unchecked, when engineers are let off the leash and told to build without compromise. That experiment left a scar and a legacy. It forced the sport to grow, which we will get to later in this video. So why build something so dangerous? Simple. Porsche was desperate to win Le Mans, the most prestigious endurance race in the world. And not just win it, they wanted to dominate it. In the 1960s, Porsche had already developed a strong reputation in racing, but they hadn't conquered the endurance crown. Meanwhile, Ford had embarrassed Ferrari with the GT40, and Porsche's engineers were itching to answer with something even more extreme. In 1968, the FIA introduced a new regulation. Any manufacturer that built at least 25 production examples of a car could race it with an engine up to 5 liters in displacement. Most companies saw this as curiosity. Porsche saw it as an opening. They immediately set to work on designing the most powerful and ambitious race car the company had ever dreamed of. The result was the 917, an engineering sledgehammer. It was built in haste, with its development pushed through before much real-world testing had been done. The engineers built 25 units practically overnight, lining them up in a warehouse to prove to the FIA that they were serious. It was a bold, slightly reckless move that perfectly foreshadowed the car's personality. The 917 was beautiful, no doubt, but it was raw and borderline unstable in its early stages. Its aerodynamics were a mess. At high speeds, it would lift off the ground, with drivers reporting terrifying instability on straights and through fast corners. Porsche kept trying to tweak and correct it, but there were always a few adjustments behind what the car truly needed. Still, they persisted. They believed in the machine. More than anything, Porsche built the 917 with the singular goal of crushing Le Mans and rewriting the rulebook of motorsport engineering. They wanted to show the world that German precision could take brute force and shape it into a winner. It wasn't about being careful. It wasn't about playing it safe. It was about going faster, longer, harder, whatever the cost. In that sense, the 917 wasn't just a car, it was a dare to the rest of the world. So, with all this power and innovation, why was the 917 effectively banned? In short, it became too good. Porsche started to dominate endurance racing. The 917 won Le Mans in 1970 and 1971. It crushed the competition so thoroughly that other manufacturers couldn't keep up. Crowds loved it. Drivers marveled at it. But the FIA? They were scared of it. By the early 1970s, concerns were mounting. The speeds were outrageous. Accidents were getting deadlier. Spectators were witnessing machines that were pushing the edge of sanity. The 917, with its brute force and unpredictable behavior in its early form, symbolized everything that was wrong with how far the engineering arms race had gone. So, in 1972, the FIA wielded the rulebook like a guillotine. They introduced sweeping changes to the World Sports Car Championship, a new 3.0-liter engine limit for prototypes, effectively excluding the 917 and every other 5-liter monster from the premier endurance racing series. This wasn't framed as a direct ban. No manufacturer was called out, but it was obvious who the rules were meant to eliminate. It was a quiet execution. No dramatic announcement, no forced retirements, just a shift in regulations so drastic it might as well have been a red card for the 917. Porsche saw the writing on the wall and stepped back from endurance racing at the height of their domination. The 917 Flat 12 wasn't just banned, it became a symbol of unshackled power, of ambition bordering on madness, of how greatness and danger often ride side by side in the high-stakes world of motorsport. But Porsche didn't walk away quietly. Instead, they looked west to the North American Can-Am series. If Europe wanted restraint and safety, Can-Am was the Wild West of motorsport. In Can-Am, the rulebook was practically non-existent, and Porsche was free to unleash its most unhinged version of the 917 yet. The result was the 917-10 and the infamous 917-30. These cars weren't just fast, they were borderline uncontrollable in the hands of mere mortals. With twin turbochargers strapped to the Flat 12, the 917-30 delivered more than 1,100 horsepower. And that's being conservative. Some claim it could spike even higher under full boost. It was so brutally quick that drivers described acceleration as a physical assault. Mark Donohue, the American racing legend, piloted the 917-30 to crushing victories. In 1973, he dominated the Can-Am series, winning 6 out of 8 races and leaving the competition in the dust. The car was so fast, so efficient, and so mechanically advanced that it turned the Can-Am series into a one-horse race. But, like its predecessor in Europe, the 917-30 was too good. The following year, Can-Am revised the rules to include fuel consumption limits, which indirectly neutered the turbocharged monster. Porsche, facing reduced interest in tighter rules, pulled out of Can-Am entirely. Despite being banished from Europe, the 917 led a second life as the undisputed track king in North America. It just adapted, changed, and ultimately disappeared once the world caught up to it. It didn't perish. So why didn't we ever see the mighty Flat 12 again? Why didn't it make a comeback when technology advanced? The answer lies in how racing itself evolved. The Flat 12 was a symbol of another era, an era of brute force, mechanical complexity, and fewer constraints. But racing changed. Efficiency became king. Safety became non-negotiable. Regulations tightened and priorities shifted from pure horsepower to balance, sustainability, and strategic engineering. The Flat 12 was a behemoth. It was huge, wide, and heavy. Its air-cooled nature made thermal management a nightmare, especially under the kinds of stress endurance racing puts on a powertrain. It guzzled fuel at a rate that would make modern engineers cringe, and it required constant maintenance, tuning, and even reinforcement of chassis components just to handle its output. As turbocharging became more refined and compact engines could deliver similar power with better efficiency, The flat 12 was simply too much machine for too little return. Porsche, always ahead of the curve, saw this and moved on. Their future prototypes leaned on downsized engines, advanced materials, and hybrid technology. And perhaps more telling, there was no longer a rulebook that allowed for the kind of madness the flat 12 represented. The very spirit of the 917 became incompatible with the sanitized, data-driven world of modern racing. So no, the flat 12 didn't fade because it wasn't good enough. It faded because racing got smarter. The world changed, and there wasn't just room for a monster like that anymore. The flat 12 lives on in legend. You can still hear its scream in fan recordings from vintage races. You can still see its shadow in every car that dares to push the limit of what's mechanically possible. It never raced again in modern Formula 1 or endurance racing, not because it couldn't, but because the rules were rewritten in its wake. The 917 and its flat 12 engine are why modern prototypes are safer, more balanced, and less about brute force and more about finesse. It showed the world what happens when you give engineers complete freedom. They build a god. And sometimes, even gods are too powerful to be left alive. So next time you hear about a car being too fast, think of the Porsche 917. It wasn't banned in the usual sense. It was retired by fear. A machine so dominant that the only way to stop it was to change the rules of the game. Let us know what you think about the forbidden legacy of the 917 flat 12 engine in the comments. And subscribe, as we've got plenty more stories of racing's most dangerous machines coming your way.